more agitated you get with everybody. And that's where Elihu was at. Now, in deference to the age and experience of Job and his three friends, Elihu, and we always ought to do that, we always ought to imitate Elihu's example of showing respect for those that have more years in service than we, and thin-skinned. Elihu's complaint against Job is he spent way too much time defending himself and justifying himself rather than seeking to understand what God was up to. Too much time wrapped up in insisting that everything was unfair, he didn't deserve these terrible things that were happening to him, rather than letting that go and seeking an understanding of what God's purposes might have been. And he was agitated with Job's friends because they kept hammering at Job, but they couldn't point out a single thing he had done wrong, could not identify a single sin. And I mentioned before that I had some guys once rake me over the coals for over 2 hours, blaming a set of circumstances on me. It had to do with the conflict over the role of women and feminism in the church, but they could not point to a single thing that I had done wrong. They said, look, we know there's something bad wrong with you. We have no idea what it is, but there's some sin in your life that's so deep we can't even see what it is. So they wound up sending me to a place that was run by a shrink for 2 decades of psychotherapy. Debbie and I called it the Spay and Neuter Clinic, and the psychotherapist couldn't find anything wrong with me either. He said, look, he just needs to be in a different place, a place where his view of what the scriptures teach about the role of women and feminism is accepted. That's all he needs. Now, Elihu did not make the mistake of thinking, he didn't disrespect his elders, but he did not make the mistake of thinking that age automatically confers wisdom. And by the way, I think I'm going to carry my remarks over into the next segment. Too much here. I don't want to give it short shrift. Because age often does not impart wisdom. There's no guarantee that just because someone has lived a long time that they will have acquired mature wisdom. It all depends on who they've been listening to and learning from as they have gone through life. Ultimately, wisdom, remember, comes from God and the Scriptures and not from life. It is not life that makes man wise, but God. There is a wisdom. Now, there is a wisdom, to be sure, that we can only acquire with age and experience, but there is nothing automatic about that. Two men can have exactly the same life experience. One can learn great lessons about God through that. The other man may learn virtually nothing and wind up bitter and angry. And this is what Job says down in verses 8 and 9. Now here's the beginning of chapter 32. These men ceased to answer Job, his three friends, because they weren't getting anywhere. Then Elihu burned with anger. He burned with anger at Job because he justified himself rather than God. He burned with anger also at Job's three friends because they had found no answer, although they had declared Job to be in the wrong. Now, Elihu had waited to speak to Job because they were older than he. And when Elihu saw that there was no answer in the mouth of these three men, he burned with anger. He said this in verse 6, I am young in years, you are aged, therefore I was timid and afraid to declare my opinion to you. I said, let the days speak and many years teach wisdom. But it is the spirit in man, the breath of the Almighty, that makes him understand. It is not the old who are wise, nor the aged who understands what is right. Therefore I say, listen to me, let me also declare my opinion. So a young man who learns from God, who is in the Scriptures, who listens to God, who seeks understanding from God, can be wiser than his teachers. We read that in the book of Proverbs. And I heard a story once about an employee who was passed over for a promotion. And someone who had not been in his business nearly as long as he had been was promoted over him. He went to his boss and he said, hey boss, I've had 13 years of experience and he's only had 3. And his boss turned to him and said, no, you have had 1 year's experience 13 times. We'll be right back. Focal Point, American Family Radio. Stay with us.
Preborn is saving babies' lives.
My name is Omaris, and I was 19 when I found out I was pregnant. I felt that if I brought a child to this planet, that I could not take care of it, and I could not be mentally prepared to handle everything that comes with having a child. So I thought my best option was to have an abortion. And once I came to have my ultrasound and I heard his heartbeat, I could not have an abortion.
The Ministry of Preborn saves babies' lives through ultrasounds. When a mother hears her baby's heartbeat on an ultrasound, she'll choose life 80% of the time. To donate and provide for a free ultrasound to help save a baby's life, go to preborn.com or dial pound 250 and say the keyword baby. That's pound 250 and say baby. All gifts are tax deductible. Your love can save a life.
And because iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold. My name is Abraham Hamilton III, and this is the Hamilton Corner. 19-year-old Nicholas Cruz entered Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, after previously being expelled, killing at least 17 people and wounding others. Predictably, the conversation devolved into a gun control debate. The reality is, however, that this massacre is not a Democrat or Republican issue. It's a sin issue. Pass all the gun control legislation you want. Evil men will find ways to commit evil. The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. It's time we got serious about sin.
Visit the Hamilton Corner on the podcast page at afr.net for more from Abraham Hamilton III, public policy analyst for the American Family Association.
This is Focal Point with Brian Fisher on American Family Radio.
Hi, and welcome back to Focal Point, American Family Radio. We have the sound fixed on our live stream on Facebook, so I encourage you to go there. If you're listening on radio and for some reason got to be away from the radio, tune us in at the Focal Point Brian Fisher on your Facebook page, and we are live streaming right there. Don't forget, we record the program as we live stream it on Facebook, upload it to the Facebook page, publish it right after the program is over with a detailed menu, detailed table of contents, so you can find your way around the program. By the way, if you're there watching us on live stream, or you're doing it later, watching it virtually as a podcast after the program is over, go ahead and hit the share button and let people on your Facebook network know about Focal Point as a program. Now let's pick up where we left off in our discussion about Job and his three friends, and Elihu, a younger man, inserting himself into this conversation. Remember, the point that we established in the first segment is age and experience do not impart wisdom. Only God does that. And Elihu was willing to defer to those who were older because he knew that there are certain things, certain kinds of wisdom, a depth of wisdom we can only acquire through wisdom, experience, and hard knocks. But he realized these men hadn't learned a single thing through their life experience, so he has to insert himself into this program, into the conversation. You know, maybe you've had this experience. This was Elihu's experience. You know, you're getting more and more worked up as you watch what's going on. You're sitting there watching this exchange or whatever. You get more and more worked up, and you finally get to the point where you know that you are just going to explode if you don't say something. You've been silent as long as you can. And that was the case with Elihu. He says this in verse 18, I am full of words, he says. The spirit within me constrains me. Behold, my belly is like wine that has no vent, like new wineskins ready to burst, because the wine continues to ferment, releases the gases that put pressure on the skin of the wine. And that's how Elihu was feeling. His spirit was filling up, and it was about ready to burst. I must speak, he says, that I may find relief. I must open my lips and answer. And so then he speaks to Job and his friends. Now he says to Job, and this is an important thing, he says to Job, look, Job, you've spent too much time talking to God and not enough time listening to God. Too much time complaining and not enough time trusting. You want God to speak directly to you and explain himself to you, but he says that isn't always how God works. God has different ways of speaking to us. For instance, he says in chapter 33, verse 15, God may speak to us in a dream that comes in the middle of the night. This is what he says in verse 15. In a dream, well, he says this in verse 13, God speaks in one way and in two, although man does not perceive it. So he says, Job, unless you're aware of the different ways in which God can speak to you and communicate to you, you might miss his voice. Verse 15, in a dream, in a vision of the night, when deep sleep falls on men while they slumber on their beds, then he opens the ears of men, that he may turn men aside from his deed. So that's one of the ways, Job, that God may speak to you. A second way he says God may speak to you is through your suffering. You may receive a visit from an angel or another messenger sent by God who opens your eyes to see what God wants you to know and understand from your suffering. This is what he says. Man is also rebuked with pain on his bed and with continual strife in his bones. Well, I can identify with that. So that his life loathes bread and his appetite the choicest food. His flesh is so wasted away that it cannot be seen. His bones that were not seen stick out. And then he says an angel, a mediator, one of 1,000, may come to declare to man what is right for him. That is in the middle of his suffering, because your ears are attuned to God. You know, when you're flat on your back, there's only one way you can look, and that is up. So this angel, which is just the Hebrew word for messenger, may declare to you what is right. He is merciful to him, says, deliver him, the mediator, that is this friend, deliver my friend from going down into the pit. I found a ransom in the mediator. Let his flesh become fresh with youth. Let him return to the days of his youthful vigor. Then man prays to God. After receiving this understanding from his visitor, he sees his face with a shout of joy. Then God restores to man his righteousness. You know, this is what C.S. Lewis said. You know, and he says, look, you may realize that you were wrong in a way that you had never considered before, in a way that you had never seen before. This is what C.S. Lewis says about the role of pain in growing us to maturity. Pain insists on being attended to. God whispers to us in our pleasures. He speaks to us in our conscience, but he shouts in our pain. It is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world. Well, let's take these things to prayer. And I'm going to pray this in the first person. You can identify, pray along with me. If it seems to apply to someone you know and love, pray in proxy for them. Lord God, I pray that you will help me to understand when to remain silent and when to speak. I pray that I will, as Elihu did, show proper respect for those who are older and more experienced than I, and wait for their words and listen to their counsel. And yet, Lord, there may be times when your Spirit, the breath of the Almighty, gives me understanding that my elders do not have. You teach us here that it is not the old who are wise, or the aged who understand what is right, but those who receive understanding from your Spirit. Grant me the self-control and self-restraint not to speak my share too soon. Grant me the discernment to know when the time is right for me to speak. I pray that when I speak, my words will come from an upright heart, and that I will speak in sincerity only what I know to be true. May your Spirit, the Spirit that has made me and given me life, speak through me. As I think of my own suffering, I embrace the counsel of Elihu. I confess that you are greater than man. Protect me from speaking against you in ways that are not right, or contending against you. I know that you speak in many ways, now one way, now another, and I often do not perceive it. Grant me discernment to recognize when you are speaking to me as I slumber in my bed. May I understand when you are speaking in my ears at night to turn me from wrongdoing and keep me from pride and preserve my life. I also accept the truth that you may rebuke me through pain and speak to me with constant distress in my body. I pray to you, Lord Jesus, in those times of distress, that you would be for me a mediator, that one out of 1,000 who will tell me what is right for me. I ask you to be gracious to me and to intercede with the Father that he may deliver me from going down into the pit. I believe that you gave your life as a ransom for me. In you may my flesh be renewed as in the days of my youth. I pray that I will find favor with you, Father, when I pray to you. May I see your face and shout for joy. Please restore me to my righteous state. Remind me of those times when I sinned and perverted what was right, but was not repaid with what I deserved. I believe, Father, that all the things you do to a man, to me, you do to turn my soul back from the pit, that the light of your life may shine on me. I pray that I will learn to be silent before you and learn wisdom from you. This I pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Lessons from the book of Job. Good stuff today in that portion of Scripture. Rich stuff there as Elihu steps into the conversation. All right. Well, let's begin our journey through the content that I've got for you today. Got a lot. I want to begin with this Joy Behar business, revisiting that just for a moment. Remember, Joy Behar said that Mike Pence had a case of mental illness because he believed that God spoke to him. You know, and that raises a couple of interesting connections, things that I believe are worth thinking about. Remember that Hillary Clinton regularly communed with Eleanor Roosevelt. Now, when she talked to Eleanor Roosevelt, and Eleanor Roosevelt talked to her, does Joy Behar want to say that she was a lunatic, that she was a crazy person? Now, let's think back to November of 2017. Speaking of Joy Behar, her own self, she wrote a book called The Great Gas Bag, an A to Z Guide to Surviving Trump World. She was on Morning Joe on MSNBC, and here's what she said. This is a direct quote, that she wrote the survival guide, quote, because she was being told by God to save this country. So according to Joy Behar's own standard, she herself is a crazy person. She's a lunatic. She has a case of mental illness. You know, so 3 months before she's climbing all over Mike Pence's frame, that's 3 months, ladies and gentlemen, she admits that God spoke to her and she wrote a book in response to the conversation that she had with him. So she's essentially admitting that that book came out of a psychologically disturbed and mentally questionable psychological state. You know, and then Oprah. Think of Oprah. She was on 60 Minutes, and they were talking to her about whether or not she was going to run for president. So they were having a back and forth about this. And this is what Oprah matter-of-factly said to her questioner and to her host. If God actually wanted me to run, wouldn't God kind of tell me? And she said, I haven't heard that. Now let's assume for the sake of argument that she does decide to run, that she does hear from God, and she decides to run for president. What is Joy Behar then going to say about Oprah Winfrey? Now what she ought to say, based on what Joy Behar herself tells us she believes, don't vote for Oprah. She's a lunatic. She's a crazy person. She's mentally ill. Somehow, I'm not sure that's the campaign message we are going to get from Joy Behar at that point. All right, we got more content to come on. A quick little story I want to give to you. I rooted for this cow. This is a cow, was on his way to the slaughterhouse, and he escaped. He was on a lorry. This is over in Poland, I believe. Was on a lorry taken to be killed for meat. Instead, it jumps off the lorry, rams through a metal fence, and makes a dash for a nearby lake. Now, the cow's owner tried to get the cow back to the farm, and the cow broke one of the worker's arms in his pursuit of freedom. It then entered the water and swam to one of the islands in the middle of the lake. The pursuit wasn't done. The rest of the story when we come back. Focal Point, American Family Radio.
This is Dr. Richard Lamb, president of Southern Evangelical Seminary. Welcome to Bringing Every Thought Captive. The last several days, we've been discussing Presidents Washington and Lincoln as we have commemorated the President's Day holiday. In all rankings of presidents that I have seen from historians and presidential scholars, Washington and Lincoln are always ranked first and second as the greatest presidents. Sometimes Washington is first and sometimes Lincoln. However, beyond that, the rankings can fluctuate wildly. I recently read a great book, 3 Days in January, by Bret Baier, chief political anchor for Fox News. The book is about President Eisenhower's last days in office in January 1961 and the background of his famous farewell address to the American people. President Eisenhower, popularly known as Ike, was the general who liberated Europe and was president from 1953 to 1961. Presidents can go up and down the ranks of presidential scholars and rankings rather dramatically. History gives us more perspective, and the long-term success and failure of presidents and their policies can go up or down. Eisenhower is a great example. In 1962, the year after he left office, he was ranked 22nd out of 34 presidents. In 2014, a half-century later, he had risen to number 7 behind Lincoln, Washington, Theodore Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, Thomas Jefferson, and Harry Truman. Truman is another example, perhaps the most unpopular president since polling began in the early 20th century when he left office. He had a 24% approval rating the day he left office. Now, he is widely regarded as the third most consequential president of the 20th century after Roosevelt and Reagan. Current news is just the first draft of history. We really won't know how well each president actually does or did until long after they have died. Presidents should do what they believe is the right thing to do, not follow the polls, and then they should leave the judgment of their performance to history. This is Richard Land.
This is Focal Point with Brian Fisher on American Family Radio. Listen to the audio podcast or download today's program at afr.net. You can also read Brian Fisher's columns at afa.net.
Hi, and welcome back to Focal Point on American Family Radio. Brian Fisher is my name. Glad to have you in the conversation today. And I was telling you before the break that I was about this cow in Poland that was on his way to the slaughterhouse and escaped, broke through a fence, broke a co-worker's arm who was trying to capture him, and swam across a lake to an island in the middle of the lake. Now, the owner, this Mr. Lukasz, he spent a week trying to get the cow back, and he finally gave up and just decided he was going to make sure it was fed enough food to stay alive. Now, firefighters used a boat to get to the island and get to the cow. The cow ran across the island and swam about 50 meters to a neighboring peninsula. So the deputy commander of the fire brigade said the animal was frightened but healthy, but they couldn't get it. Now, there was a vet that was called in to tranquilize this animal, but he said, Mr. Lukasz, I've run out of gas cartridges, and it'll take me several days to get new ones. So the owner decided at that point, he was thinking about shooting the animal dead, and he finally decided, man, I don't know if I want to mess with whatever mojo this cow has on his team. And then there's a politician and a former singer who raised the animal's plight on a Facebook post last Wednesday. And he said this about the cow: she escaped heroically and infiltrated the island in the middle of the lake where it remains today. She did not succumb to firefighters who wanted to transport her by boat, and she is still on the battlefield. And so they decided, so the guy said, even though I'm not a vegetarian, this is the singer and even though I'm not a vegetarian, I admire the fortitude and will to live that this cow's life has. Therefore, I decided to do everything to cause the cow to be delivered to a safe place, and in the second stage, as a reward for her attitude, to give her a guarantee of a long-term retirement and natural death.
Wow.
So that is our feel-good story for the day. I'm for the cow in that little skirmish right
Cal
there.
had its own Facebook page too, huh?
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, you go, Cal. I'm with
Yeah.
you. Remember we had that story about a cow breaking loose in New York?
Yeah.
We never did. I don't think we ever found out how that thing happened. He was running down the middle of like Broadway or someplace like that, and they couldn't track him down. All right, well, let's keep going with content here. You know, one of the things we have complained about is the censorship that we as conservatives run into at the hands of liberals. And here's an example, because I'm sure that these liberals don't see anything wrong with what they did. You know who James Damore is? We spent considerable amount of time talking about him before, even playing sound bites from him. He's the guy that worked at Google. He wrote a 10-page memo talking about the differences between men and women and how that might explain why there aren't more women who are in engineering and IT careers. And for that, he was absolutely blasted. I mean, from pillar to post. Google wound up firing him. He sued Google because, remember, Google says we don't discriminate in hiring and firing on the basis of gender. We don't do it. Well, here they fired him because he was a male who thought there were differences between male and female. So he got fired. He went to court to sue them, and he lost. His case was thrown out of court. So he was invited to give a speech at Portland State about his memo, which did nothing more than tell the truth about the biological differences between males and females and how they might explain the difference in the typical choice of careers that men make and women make. And for that, he was hounded out of Silicon Valley. You know, and the whole point of his memo was, look, gender diversity and being a conservative makes it very difficult to be a part of the environment here at Google. And he found out just how difficult it was because they threw him out on his fanny to the curb. So anyway, he gives this speech at Portland State, and the activists that were there, first they interrupted it by shouting and jeering. They staged a walkout, and then they smashed the sound system so that not only they wouldn't have to listen to him, but even the people that showed up and wanted to hear what he had to say could not listen to him. So again, that is, typical of how the left thinks. This is what Google had said when they fired him. Portions of the memo, that's that memo he wrote about the differences between the sexes, portions of the memo violate our code of conduct and cross the line by advancing harmful gender stereotypes in our workplace. So notice that what the head of Google is doing is basically saying if you believe that there are differences between men and women, that makes you a hater. That makes you a misogynist. You believe something that is harmful. It's a harmful gender stereotype. We cannot have any truck with that. You are gone. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's the environment that we're in. Google thinks that if you believe, as I do and as most of you do, that there are genuine differences between men and women, and the differences are not matter of a superiority or inferiority. They're just different. They each have value. They each contribute something wonderful and rich and invaluable to life. They're just different. One is not better than the other. But, and you realize, who the real misogynists are here? The real misogynists are the people who disagree with us. Because, let me try to be sure I can put this clearly. We believe that there are differences, profound differences, between men and women. We value those differences. We value and admire the traits that we see in women that are different than the traits that we see in ourselves. We admire them and we praise them for that. And we love that about them most of the time. But what people who don't believe there are any differences do, they would look at those same differences and they despise them. They despise women who evidence characteristics that are different than the characteristics that men typically have because they want to believe that there aren't any differences. That's a lie that they want to believe, that there are no differences. So they despise, this is what I want you to get, in reality, they despise the things that make women different from men. They belittle those qualities. They belittle those characteristics. They look down on them. They despise them. So the real misogynists, ladies and gentlemen, are the feminists in the room. Now, another issue that's important to us here at the American Family Association is obviously family. We're the American Family Association for a reason. Even the Supreme Court, time after time after time, has acknowledged that parents have the ultimate right to control the education and the upbringing of their children. This is the Supreme Court. First decision was in 1923, right up until 1997. They've issued one string of opinions and rulings after another that parents have the ultimate authority over the education and upbringing of their children. Now, in Columbus, Ohio, two parents who by all accounts are excellent parents, they're not abusive, they love their daughter, they believe in their daughter, they want only the best for them. They lost custody of their daughter. Their daughter was taken away from them, and the reason that their daughter was taken away from them is they did not want her to go through transgender transitional therapy. Did not want her to go through the hormone treatments, the drug treatments, and the counseling that go along with that. They had a 17-year-old daughter who's now convinced apparently that she is a male. And we've seen, this is a true fact, that 80 to 90%, this is what the research tells us, and the people that work with these individuals tell us, 80 to 90% of all children who get gender confused at times, who go through a period of gender confusion, think they're in a wrong sex body or whatever, they outgrow it. By the time they make adulthood, around 21, 80 to 90% of them have outgrown it. It's a phase they go through. It's an unfortunate phase. It can happen to them without warning. But if they just steady through it, they will outgrow it, and they will soon get back to the place where their mental image of themselves is consistent with the biological reality that they carry around with them. But the judge said, no, we're going to take your daughter away from you because we think we know best. We think that we know best. We think that it's important that your daughter be able to transition to being a male, and since you are too benighted and antiquated to understand that, we're going to yank your daughter away from you. You're not going to be allowed to be her parents any longer. And what started this whole thing off was the Hamilton County Job and Family Services. Apparently, they've got some kind of right under Ohio law to take legal custody of the girl away from her parents. And then apparently went to a judge and got him to sign off on that. So the doctors decided that since she has gender dysphoria, she ought to be given testosterone and sex change drugs. The parents disagree. They want their daughter to go through counseling that will enable her to get past her gender dysphoria, reconcile her mental image of herself with the biological reality of her life. But they're being opposed by the doctors, being opposed by the Child and Family Services in Columbus, being opposed by a judge, and now they have being opposed by the girl's grandparents. The girl's grandparents want her to go through the sex change treatment. So the judge ruled against them on Friday, and so she's gone. She's now in the custody, and remember, one of the tragic things about people who go through this kind of transition is 41% of them attempt suicide. So these doctors and her grandparents and these social workers and this judge, they have put this girl on a track that leads inevitably to suicide ideation and suicidal attempts. So who are the ones that are doing the permanent psychological damage to this girl? It's not her parents. They genuinely want what is best for her, but by forcing these life-changing decisions against the will of the parents, they are condemning her very likely to taking her own life. So this is why we fight for the right of parents, ladies and gentlemen. This is a horrible wrong. It's a crime, according to the Supreme Court, and it's a sin as well. Focal Point American Family Radio. Give us a call. Take your calls in the next segment, 888-589-8840, 888-589-8840.
Exposing Washington with Walker Wildman.
So who is responsible for the dysfunction in Washington? That's what we're going to be discussing today.
We have become one of the most litigious societies on the planet.
The goal of this show is to bring clarity to the news coming out of Washington, D.C., and to expose the deception that has plagued our nation's capital for decades.
Exposing Washington.
Each Saturday at 2:30 p.m. Central.
On American Family Radio.
It says, and do the first works. What is that? Go back and begin by faith to obediently do what you did when you were first saved, that you're not doing anymore.
Join Dr. David Jeremiah for his series Escape the Coming Night, next time on Turning Point.
5:30 a.m. and 7 p.m. Central on American Family Radio.
Hello, everyone. I'm Tim Wildman, president of American Family Association and American Family Radio. We still have seats available for our September tours, Washington, D.C. and Williamsburg. Washington, D.C. and Mount Vernon, that's one tour. And then Williamsburg, Jamestown, and Yorktown, that is a separate tour. Now, we put them back to back so you can do both. If you're flying in from Texas or Montana or California or wherever you may be coming from, so that you can do those tours back to back with us if that's something you so choose to do. Now, Stephen McDowell of the Providence Foundation will be with us all along the way as our historian. Stephen will add context, he'll answer questions, talk about the people, the places, the events that make up our early American history. So for more information on this Spiritual Heritage Tour, go to the website spiritualheritagetours.com. spiritualheritagetours.com for the September tour information.
American Family Radio. You're listening to Focal Point with Brian Fisher. Brian Fisher.
Welcome back to Focal Point, American Family Radio. We did receive a request from a listener, an alert listener, maybe too alert for my particular taste. But this listener has sent a request to the executive producer of the program. She wants to know exactly what I meant as the host of this program by appreciating the differences between men and women most of the time. So the listener wants the executive producer to elaborate on that. And, of course, if she decides to do that, I will carefully weigh her response and then decide whether it merits airtime. I will tell you one of the disagreements we had, and this has to do with the differences between women that we still laugh about. We laugh about it. You eventually can laugh about these things. We were going to a movie with some friends, and it was that time of the season for Debbie, of the monthly season. It was that time, and so she was a little bit short with me, and I forget what we were arguing about, but Debbie was intense about this, and she was determined that we had to resolve this issue before we went into the theater. So we're having this argument in the car. We're out of the car. We're in the parking lot getting ready to walk into the theater, and she just is insisting that we have to resolve this issue right now. And I made the mistake of saying, Debbie, we are not going to be able to resolve this issue for 4 days at least. So, then I ducked and rolled under the nearest car.
There's only two words at a time like that.
And what's that?
You're right.
Yeah, that's right. It's either that you're right or look out. Yeah. So, one or the other. So with enough distance, you can actually laugh about something.
By the way,
yeah.
Talking about bad moods.
Yeah.
This has got to be a terrible day for Hillary Clinton being President's Day. She's probably not enjoying today.
Well, the good news is she can work out some of her angst by talking things over with Eleanor Roosevelt. Take the sting away. All right, number to call is 888-589-8840, 888-589-8840. By the way, just before we go to the phones, I've got a lengthy article in Politico, ran to 7 pages. I'm not going to bother you with the details because they're not even really important, because we've covered these things as they've developed. But this entire article is 7 pages in which Politico is lamenting the fact that Donald Trump is dismantling, that's the word they use, dismantling LGBT-friendly policies, by which they mean policies that affirm LGBT agenda and compel people to accept it and to embrace it under threat of punishment. That's what they're talking about. And Donald Trump and his administration are rolling these things back one after another. 7 pages of evidence that Politico has. Trump administration dismantles LGBT-friendly policies. And of course, when they talk about LGBT-friendly policies, what they mean by that is anti-family friendly policies. Every LGBT policy is a threat to the nuclear family. Well, we just saw that with this teenager in Columbus, threat to the nuclear family. And this is what the left wants to do. The left wants to tear apart and destroy the nuclear family. They hate the institution of man-woman marriage. They hate an intact family. They hate an understanding of gender roles, where these gender roles are appreciated and affirmed and lived out in the family. They hate that kind of stuff. And so they are anti-family policies, not LGBT-friendly policies. They are anti-family policies, and the Trump administration is working on dismantling them good for President Trump. All right, let's go to our phones. Let's go to Jason. Okay, now how come I can't pull Jason? I have to do the thing over here, do the connection thing. I think that's where I'm at. Okay, let me try to bring Jason. There we go. Jason in Tupelo, welcome. What's on your mind, Jason?
Well, you know, God has a sense of humor, and he's exercising that right now, because my comment to you was not on something that you mentioned, but rather the prayer that you prayed. And I just want to thank you for that. I thank you for your heart and for your devotion every day to the TV, to the radio show. I think AFA, and the Christian Nation is in a really good shape with you doing your job and doing what the Lord's called you to do. And I was going to thank you for your wisdom, but then you made that comment and you came back on the air. So now I'm not sure whether I should go that far or not, or just leave it where it is. Thank you so much.
In other words, Jason, I just blew your whole image of me in that one little line.
Well, you know, and the poor people watching on Facebook or something like that, they're traumatized. But listen, thank you so much. You could not have sat down and written a prayer that means as much as that prayer meant in a month's time. So thank you for what you do and your hard work.
Great, Jason. I appreciate that very, very much. That's very kind. You don't have any idea how much that means to me. And, you know, the prayers that I write, I use the words of Scripture. So if there's something that you admire about them, about the language and about the poignancy of it and about how on point they are, I'm just taking the words of Scripture and doing some rearranging and a little bit of modest changing to form them into prayers. But the beauty and the content and the impact really comes from the Word of God. All right, Jason, thank you very much, I think. No, just kidding, Jason. Thank you. Let's go to Michael in Columbus, Ohio. Michael, welcome to Focal Point. What's on your mind?
Hi, Brian. I just wanted to say that the case that you had with the girl being taken away from her family is just one example of the problems that are actually going on in Columbus. I've lived in Columbus my entire life, and the left-wing ideology that's being pumped in. The neighborhood that I used to live in was a really nice neighborhood for the longest time, and the problem that we have now is our immigration problem is actually one of the biggest problems that we have, which is also just this reinforced left-wing ideology that everything's okay. Well, we've been screaming that this is not okay, and the apartment complex that is around the corner from us, it's Wedgwood Apartments, has one of the highest Somali populations in Columbus, and its murder rate last year was astronomical. And they say that there's no way to narrow down any of this. Well, there is a way to narrow it down. There's a reason Franklin County wasn't won for Donald Trump last year, and it's because what they're doing is they're just reinforcing this left-wing ideology, and people are leaving Columbus in droves. There's no economy. They tried to bring it back with a casino, which is just the worst idea that they could have ever possibly had. That's not going to bring the type of people that we want into our city. And it just gets worse and worse every year, and they stop listening to the people, so people leave Columbus. This left-wing ideology is going to completely dismantle and ruin and destroy the city of Columbus. And that's why people are leaving these major cities. That's the real problem that's going on. It's our leadership, 100%.
Yeah, and I agree with you, Michael, and we've got statistical evidence to back up what you are saying. You know, people are leaving liberal states as well as cities. They're leaving California in droves. They're leaving New York in droves because of the tax rates, because of the left-wing ideology, because of the illegal immigration that's flooding in and changing their culture. You know, there's a certain culture that people have that they love, that they're a part of. They appreciate it. They value it. It's what they inherited from their parents' generation. They want to preserve it for their kids, and they see that all that being shredded, all that unraveling in front of them, and so they wind up leaving. You know, and this is true for a lot of the big cities besides Columbus, Ohio. So it is, you know, it's a real shame, and a lot of it does go back to unrestrained immigration. You know, this is the reason that Viktor Orban in Hungary, they have pretty much banished refugees from the country of Hungary. And I'm not saying we ought to do that here, but Hungary has banished refugees and banished Islamic immigration virtually in total, and they have built a border wall around their country to stop illegal immigration. They've virtually got it shut off, and Viktor Orban says the reason we are doing this, the people that are coming into Hungary have no appreciation, no value that they place on the Christian tradition. And we are a Christian nation by history, heritage, and tradition, which is also true, by the way, of the United States, which is exactly why I'm opposed to unrestrained Islamic immigration. You know, I did an interview with First Things magazine with a writer doing a freelance piece for First Things magazine on Saturday, and I kind of shocked him when I said, look, in my view, Islam is the Ebola virus of culture, because everywhere it goes, everywhere it erupts, it transforms the culture, and not in a way that is good. All right, Michael, thank you for the call. Sorry to hear about what's going on up there in Columbus. Let's go to Lee in Bluefield, Virginia. Lee, welcome. What's on your mind?
Yes, I was just sitting here thinking a while ago, you was talking about the girl in Ohio that her family was forced to let her have that operation. When you get right down to it, Satan is following the exact plan of God. God made the first thing, he made man, and then he made a woman. Well, they're trying to question the way the people should look at themselves anymore. If you can get them questioning themselves, then you can change the family, which is the second thing that God ordained. If you can change the family, then you can change the nation, which is the third thing God ordained. And if you can change the nation, you can change the church, which is the last thing God ordained. Mm-hmm. It's all about change.
Yeah. All right, Lee, that is really very good. And, you know, Lee's exactly right. The left hates everything that God supports. He supports, encourages belief in him. So the left naturally is going to try to destroy the recognition of God in any of our public institutions. He values the family, so they're going to try to destroy marriage and redefine it. And he created the church. And so they will try to dismantle the church and cause it to go out of business. All right, well, that's it for the first hour. Thank you for your calls. We'll be right back with hour number 2. You're listening to Focal Point on American Family Radio. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back. More to come here on American Family Radio.
Faith, family, freedom. American Family Radio.
The AFA Cultural Institute, a video library of resources dealing with the discussions of our day.
Marriage and family, finances, evangelizing Muslims. The AFA Cultural Institute takes all of these topics and puts them in the hands of people to be able to equip them.
Start your library of the AFA Cultural Institute at afastore.net.
Faith, family, freedom. American Family Radio, a ministry of the American Family Association.
American Family News, I'm Rusty Pugh. The White House says the president is open to making some changes to the background check system to prevent guns from getting into the wrong hands. John Decker reports.
President Trump spoke with Republican Senator John Cornyn about a bipartisan bill he and Democratic Senator Chris Murphy introduced to improve federal compliance with criminal background checks. White House spokesman Raj Shah.
When you're looking at ways to fix this system, you want to look at measures like fixing the background check system. You also want to understand what broke down.
Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer says it's time for lawmakers to act.
We can both preserve the right to bear arms of law-abiding citizens and still at the same time make sure that those who don't deserve to have guns don't get them.
The president will participate in a pair of listening sessions on school safety this week. At the White House, John Decker, Fox News.
Dallas police say a U.S. Postal Service worker has been found shot to death inside a mail truck along a busy highway. Police released a statement today saying the case is being investigated as a homicide. They say officers found the worker's body inside the government vehicle early this morning after responding to a reported shooting along Interstate 30 near downtown Dallas. The U.S. Postal Service operates a large complex nearby. Investigators say no arrests have been made and that they're still trying to determine a motive in the shooting. The head of a pro-Israel Christian organization says Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is facing the same kind of persecution from forces that want to bring him down as President Trump is here in the U.S. Chad Groening has more.
Police have recommended that charges be filed against the prime minister for bribery, fraud, and breach of trust. For Netanyahu, it is business as usual, as he attended the Munich security conference less than 48 hours after law enforcement officials made their recommendation. And he has scheduled a trip to the United States to visit President Trump next month. Lori Cardoza-Moore is founder and president of Proclaiming Justice to the Nations. She says this reminds her of what has been happening to President Trump.
Honestly, I think that this is an attempt to try to remove this man from office, just like they're trying to remove Trump. And you know, the Word of God says that God raises up kings and he brings them down. Nobody can touch these leaders. God raised Bibi up for such a time as this. He's raised Trump up for such a time as this, and nobody is going to remove them apart from God allowing it.
And Cardoza-Moore says Netanyahu's accusers are grasping at straws.
I want to see the evidence of how accepting those gifts affected a vote or affected something that Bibi did that was illegal.
I'm Chad Groening.
A petition campaign to help pastors stand against government overreach continues. More from Chris Woodward.
Family Research Council Action is addressing the petition to 2 Michigan state representatives, saying they demanded their state's attorney general launch an investigation into Metro City Church of Riverview, Michigan, and Forge Ministries after the pastor and church offered the Unashamed Identity Workshop to provide what they call a safe place for teenage girls to learn what the Bible teaches about sexuality. Randy Wilson, FRC's National Field Director for Church Ministries, says the lawmakers are also pushing a bill to prevent churches from offering such workshops.
We came out to stand with Pastor Jeremy, hold a press conference, and address this incredible act to move to enact a bill, House Bill 5550, that reaches the government reaching into the church to control and direct their activities. So we are standing, alerting pastors, encouraging them to call their representatives and those that are in the district, 55 and 23, these 2 representatives who wrote this bill, call them and say to back out.
Some news outlets and observers have described or compared the church's activity to so-called conversion therapy. Wilson says that's not the case at all.
Pastor Jeremy didn't ask for this fight. This fight came to him because he was just responding to a need in his church.
I'm Chris Woodward.
American Family News is online at onenewsnow.com and download the One News Now mobile app for your Apple or Android device. I'm Rusty Pugh.
As a 10-year-old boy, my dad and our whole family started back to church.
Bert Harper on the Word of God.
And the church I went to, the pastor really preached the Word of God with conviction. I knew that it was a book that we could depend upon and live our lives by. And I hope I bring that same passion into exploring the Word.
Exploring the Word with Bert Harper and Alex McFarland. Weekday afternoons at 3 Central on American Family Radio.
It's time for the special counsel to interview Hillary Clinton, John Kerry, Susan Rice, Ben Rhodes, and maybe even Barack Obama.
There is no evidence at this point that there was any collusion between the Trump campaign, Trump associates, and this Russian effort to disrupt the election.
I guarantee that there is no political influence in any investigation.
Some of the responsibility is also attributed to the Obama administration.
Guaranteed, full stop.
There is no allegation that any American was a knowing participant in this illegal activity.
The Trump campaign did not know about Russian interference in the U.S. election, but the Obama administration certainly did.
Nobody is above the law.
When you were asked what's the biggest geopolitical threat facing America, you said Russia. The 1980s are now calling to ask for their foreign policy back.
Freedom prospers when religion is vibrant and the rule of law under God is acknowledged.
An informed patriot is what we want.
Welcome to American Family Radio's Focal Point, the home of muscular Christianity on conservative talk radio.
Muscular Christianity.
Where we relentlessly explore the intersection of truth and politics.
The trouble with our liberal friends is not that they're ignorant. It's just that they know so much that isn't so.
Now, here's your host, Brian Fisher.
Hi, and welcome back to the second hour of Focal Point on American Family Radio. Brian Fisher is my name. Great to have you in the conversation today. I want to talk a little bit about this school shooting down in Florida. We're also going to talk about what's going on in D.C. with the FBI and the brouhaha over this FBI investigation and all of the latest in that. But let's talk about the Florida thing just for a few minutes. What conservatives have been trying to point out to people is that there is no law that could have prevented this. There is not a single law that could be enacted that would have done anything to prevent this, because this young man, the shooter, Cruz, was a legal owner of that gun. He purchased it legally. He passed a background check. So you got all these people out there calling for background checks. Well, they already have them. You can't buy a gun without a background check. Now they're talking about keeping guns out of the hands of the mentally disturbed, which sounds like a good idea, but there are problems with that we need to be aware of. You're not going to be able to fix this problem by, what Bill Nelson wanted to do. If you're on a terror watch list, we can't let you have a gun. But of the 2,000 people that are on the terror watch list who bought guns, not a single person has been accused of using a gun in a crime. So you're robbing them of a constitutional right before they've ever had their day in court. An assault weapon ban wouldn't do it. Where they've been able to examine the difference between assault bans before and after, they make no discernible reduction in the lethality and injuriousness of gun violence, because most murders are committed with handguns, not even with rifles. And the other thing, you can take guns away from people. Well, 98% of mass shootings in the United States since 1950, this is a good statistic to remember, 98% of the mass shootings in America since 1950 have taken place in gun-free zones. New York a number of years ago banned gun ownership for 34,500 people based on the fact that there was some reason to believe that they were mentally unstable. 34,500 people, notice, had their Second Amendment right to gun ownership banned without ever spending one single day in court. And the problem here, of course, is that too many people have been categorized as dangerous. And this law that was passed in New York, it's called the Safe and Secure Act or something like that, the SAFE Act. It requires licensed mental health professionals to report to the authorities any patient who, quote, is likely to engage in conduct that would result in serious harm to self or to others, end quote. And if they do, if a mental health professional says, I believe in my judgment this person is likely to engage in conduct that would result in serious harm to self or to others, they can be deprived of their ability and liberty and freedom to own a gun. Now remember, the Constitution says, look, you can be deprived of a constitutional right as long as you have received due process. You can be deprived of your right to life as long as you have received due process. You can be deprived of your right to liberty as long as you have received due process. They can lock you up. You can be deprived of your right to property. If you receive due process, they can take your property away. They can fine you if you have received a due process. But you have to have your day in court. You have to be able to face your accusers and insist that they justify before a court that you are truly dangerous. But you know, in New York, you could lose your right to own a gun because of some anonymous medical professional who doesn't even have to be a doctor, you know, and he has turned you in. And then you got to wonder about the FBI and their ability to stop these things. You know, Russia warned the FBI 3 times about the Tsarnaev brothers that blew up the Boston Marathon in April of 2013. The Russian authorities warned the FBI in 2011 about Tamerlan Tsarnaev, but the U.S. authorities missed a number of chances to detain him. They missed multiple chances to detain him when he was traveling to and from Dagestan. You know what he was doing going to Dagestan? He was going there to participate in terror training camps, and they couldn't even apprehend him when he was going back and forth from there. And then the FBI did not tell the Boston police after the Boston Marathon that they had a trained terrorist in their midst, or at least maybe even before the marathon. Boston police simply did not know, and they didn't identify the bombers in the Boston Marathon until 3 days after it had happened. You know, one of the things that's curious, you know, John Lott has a book, a great book he's written. Title of the book is More Guns, Less Crime. In other words, as gun ownership has increased in the United States, crime, violent crime, has gone down. There is a direct correlation between the number of people who own guns in America and the crime rate goes down as gun ownership goes up. Now, a Minneapolis TV station Thursday night, they were just absolutely puzzled over this. They couldn't understand it. They couldn't believe it. They're just like shocked. More people are carrying guns than ever before, but the crime rate remains low. So they're shocked, I tell you, to find out that although more people are carrying guns, the crime rate remains low. To them, it's illogical. To them, it does not make sense. If you got more guns on the streets, more guns in private hands, you're going to get more crime. It's the other way around. Why? Because people now can defend themselves. They can protect themselves, so it makes the bad guys a lot more hesitant to commit crime if they don't know who might be in a position to defend themselves. And this is called the Fox-Butterfield effect. There was a New York Times reporter back in November of 2004. He wrote this: the number of inmates in state and federal prisons rose 2.1% last year, even as violent crime and property crime fell. So he could not put this together. If the number of inmates in the federal prison system is going up 2%, how can it be that violent crime is falling? Because that would seem to indicate violent crime is on the increase. But why was crime falling? Because more of the bad guys were locked up. That's why the crime rate was falling. The number of inmates rose by 2%. The violent crime rate is going to fall because that 2.1% are now out on the street where they can commit a violent crime or a property crime. And Fox Butterfield never did understand this, that the paradox of a falling crime rate but a rising prison population. He never apparently, even though he's obviously a pretty intelligent guy to write for the New York Times, never considered the idea that if you have fewer bad guys on the street, you might have fewer crimes. Could not get it through his head. You know, the family that took Nicholas Cruz in said he showed no warning signs before the shooting that he was capable of that. They saw that he was depressed. They never saw the violent side of him. He was depressed about his mother's death. She died several months before, but they never saw any violent side of him, and he lived with them for a fair amount of time. Focal Point, American Family Radio. Be right back.
Are you a responsible person who finds yourself growing deeper and deeper in credit card debt and you're not sure how to fix the problem? Then get ready for a toll-free number that will put you on a path to financial recovery. Trinity Debt Management is a nonprofit organization that will consolidate your accounts into one easy-to-manage monthly payment, put a stop to late fees and over-limit charges, and reduce your interest rates by as much as 60%. You'll save thousands and become debt-free for keeps. It's not a loan. It's a smart way to relieve your stress, meet your obligations, and preserve your self-respect. If your debt has you down, we should talk. Gather up your bills and call this toll-free number for a free, no-obligation debt analysis. 1-800-788-1813. That's 1-800-788-1813. If you're in debt and you need help, call Trinity at 1-800-788-1813.
Attention all Christians who would like to become more effective in presenting and defending their beliefs. This is Alex McFarland, and I urge you to attend the 2018 edition of Truth for a New Generation, the conference on apologetics, worldview, and evidence for the Christian faith. TNG is coming to Greensboro, North Carolina, March 23 and 24. Hear an amazing lineup, including Josh McDowell, apologist J. Warner Wallace, Todd Starnes from Fox News, and much, much more.
This is Abraham Hamilton III of the American Family Association. We're in a battle for the future of our nation, and I want to see you at Truth for a New Generation as we pray and get equipped to defend the faith, asking God to save our nation.
Don't miss Truth for a New Generation, March 23 and 24, Greensboro, North Carolina. You may register at truthforanewgeneration.com.
Presented in part by the American Family Association.
This is Focal Point with Brian Fisher on American Family Radio.
Hi, and welcome back to Focal Point, American Family Radio. Brian Fisher is my name. A couple of more things on the shooting in Florida. When he was a student in middle school, he was in constant trouble for insulting teachers and staff, using profanity, engaging in disruptive behavior, too many unexcused absences, and one fight. His mother was called more than a dozen times for conferences with school administrators, and he was frequently sent to counseling. We know that the police were called no less than 39 times to his house for domestic assault and violence and quarrels and other kinds of things. The couple that took him in made him lock his guns in a safe, and she thought she had the only keys to the safe, but he apparently made a copy for himself that the couple didn't know about, and that's how he got his guns out. And even since the incident in Florida, there have been 12 incidents involving threats and weapons at schools since the Florida shooting. Spartanburg, South Carolina, somebody with an assault rifle posted a photo. Round 2 of Florida tomorrow. Arlington, Texas, 13-year-old boy said he wanted to shoot up the school, mentioned guns. Plano, Texas, 16-year-old boy arrested for possession. Sugar Hill, student found, Georgia, found with a gun on campus. Weatherford, Texas, 16-year-old girl made vague threats. Daytona Beach, 20-year-old man threatened violence. Oklahoma City, threat involved a middle school. Threatening email at Gilchrist County, California. Threat in a video posted to Instagram in Nutley, New Jersey. Small caliber handgun in the backpack of a 16-year-old at a high school in Flower Mound, Texas. So a lot of these threats, vague, specific, Instagram, all over the place. Now, here's where I think we start getting to a solution. And the solution is found, I'm going to look at a couple of places, Florida and Texas, where I believe they have found a solution to this problem. Now, Argyle Independent School District, which I believe is in Texas, they, since 2014, so for the last 4 years, they have trained and armed some of its school personnel, which is a decision the school district made. So that's all the schools in the Argyle Independent School District. the district decided to arm people in the wake of Sandy Hook. They said, look, we got to do something to keep a Sandy Hook incident from happening in our school. And what they did was they armed school staff. They had one of the largest active shooter training simulations in North Texas in the summer of 2016. Here's what the guy that ran this thing said. We handpicked these people. We made sure they go through an extensive screening process. They go through a psychological evaluation. Then I go through an intensive training where they shoot over 900 rounds of ammunition in just a few days. Now, they intentionally do not tell anybody in the school or out of the school how many staff and faculty have been armed and who they are. It's like the air marshals. Every flight you're on, or most everyone, you've got an air marshal on there. You've got a guy on there that's armed. But it's concealed. You don't know where he's sitting. You don't know who he is. And that's the way they do it at Argyle Independent School District. We never tell people exactly how many people we have trained or who they are. That's part of the genius of the program, to keep the mystery there so nobody knows. Now, here's a school district in West Texas where the students and the parents feel safe at their school for exactly the same reason. This is the Claude Independent School District in West Texas. The staffers at each school in this district carry concealed weapons to protect students. They implemented this program in 2016, trained staffers to carry concealed, teaches them what to do if they're ever faced with an active shooter. Staff members who carry are required to practice at a shooting range once a month. They also train with the Armstrong County Sheriff's Office and the Department of Public Safety. And the school has posted prominent signs on campus informing people that its schools are not gun-free zones. Remember what schools do? They advertise it, right? This is a gun-free zone. Libraries advertise it. This is a gun-free zone. Courthouses advertise it. This is a gun-free zone. What does that tell the bad guys? Nobody here is going to shoot back. But they've got this sign up. I'm going to read it to you. Attention, please be aware that the staff at Claude Independent School District is armed and may use whatever force necessary to protect our students. And you know, I just mentioned before, but 98% of all of the mass shootings since 1950 have been gun-free zones. And there's a sheriff in Florida who wants to bring the same idea to the whole state of Florida, really to the whole country. He wants to end this whole idea of gun-free school zones. He calls it the Sentinel program. They arm teachers with concealed weapons. They train them to effectively defend students. Been put into action at Southeastern University, getting ready to be put into effect at a high school. It selects teachers with impeccable crime-free backgrounds. Teachers undergo rigorous training that includes meeting standards beyond those that Florida law enforcement must maintain. So they get concentrated training that in the area in which they are trained, it's actually meets standards that are beyond what regular Florida law enforcement has to attain. Selected teachers undergo intense psychological evaluation. Only then are they honored, quote, as special deputy sheriffs and allowed to carry concealed on campus. You know, and this one guy talked about the fact that in Florida you had 2 coaches that were killed standing in front of and trying to protect kids. And so, look, it might have been a game changer if these guys had had a gun to defend the children. And here's the math of the whole deal. The average shooter does his evil deed in 2 to 5 minutes. Guy comes on campus, starts shooting, 5 minutes later the whole thing's over. In Broward County, it was 3 minutes. So from the time that guy came on campus and fired his first round, it was 3 minutes beginning to end. You got 3 minutes total to react. The average police response is over 5 minutes. So the average mass shooting is over in 5 minutes. So by the time the police are going to get there, it is too late for them to do anything but clean up the mess. And by the time you call 911, you think about this, by the time somebody calls 911, that means the shooter is on campus and is already wreaking havoc, which means somebody's gone to the phone and dialed 911. And you think about this hero at in Parkland, Florida. Aaron Feist was his name. He's the right man at the right time, but he was legally prevented from using the constitutionally protected tool to do his job. So the only choice he had was to throw his body in front of students and take the bullets that were intended for him, and good for him for doing that. It shows heroism and courage beyond anything that we can probably even imagine. You know, and he engaged the shooter pretty much right after he started shooting. He was pretty close to where this whole thing started. He was one of the first to respond, according to the Florida Sun-Sentinel. They were hearing the sounds out in the hallway, and he says, "Those aren't firecrackers, I'm going in." So he went into the hallway, confronted the shooter, did not have a gun where he could have neutralized the shooter, so all he could do was shield students with his body. So the only person who was trained and armed to fight back against an assailant at this high school was the one school resource officer it had, a Broward Sheriff's deputy funded by the city of Parkland, but he either was not on campus when the shooting happened or might have even been a day off, or he might have been called off campus to respond to something else. Remember, he's on the Broward Sheriff's Department as a deputy, so he might have been called off to respond to a sheriff call or whatever, and they're stretched very thin. And it's the Gun-Free School Zones Act of 1990 that prevents school personnel from arming themselves. So you think about it, what if Aaron Feist had a Glock on his hip when the code red went off? Two cases serve as an example of what might have happened. In May 3rd of 2015, Elton Simpson and Nadir Sufi attacked the Curtis Colwell Center in Garland, Texas, where a free speech event was being held. This was the Everybody Draw Muhammad contest, or having an art contest at this Colwell Center, where everybody could draw their drawing depiction of Muhammad, and they were going to have a display of it and give an award to the one that won. And Pamela Geller was there, and Robert Spencer, two of the leading people in America exposing the jihadist movement. But they were armed with 3 pistols and 3 semi-automatic rifles when they pulled up outside this cultural center, going to go in there. There were 200 people inside. They wanted to kill them all. There was a single police officer who was working as a security guard at the event. He had only a .45 caliber Glock, but he shot and wounded the attackers and stopped the attack without any loss of life. Now you think about the Charlie Hebdo magazine office in Paris. Heavily armed men attacked there, and the first responder was a bicycle cop named Ahmed Merabet, might have even been a Muslim, but his own government had disarmed him. They don't allow the police there, didn't allow him anyway, the French government, to carry a weapon. So he was helpless to defend himself against the AK-47s. They calmly walked over, they wounded him, then walked over calmly and shot him dead, lying in the street. So Aaron Feist was ready to be a hero of a different type, a guy that could have neutralized the attacker, but his constitutional right to protect himself and to others had been infringed. Now let's grab clip number 8. This is Kamala Harris, probably going to be our next president if the Democrats have their way, talking to MSNBC. Let's hear what she has to say.
It's going to sound a bit harsh. As a prosecutor for years, in appreciating homicide and being able to talk with a judge about it and a jury about it, I had to look at autopsy photographs. When you see the effect of this extreme violence on a human body, and especially the body of a child, maybe it will shock some people into understanding this cannot be a political issue. We have to be practical. I support the Second Amendment, but we have to have smart gun safety laws. And we cannot tolerate a society and live in a country with any level of pride when our babies are being slaughtered.
You know, we've referenced this kind of statement from liberals before. This is another one talking about our babies being slaughtered, and we cannot tolerate a society and live in a country with any level of pride when our babies are being slaughtered. Well, that's true of life in the womb. And liberals just do not see the obvious connection between what they claim is a value and one that they're neglecting and even trampling in other cases. You know, and she says, you know, the autopsy photos, when people see what actually happens to a body, it might shock them into understanding that this can't be a political issue. Same thing happened when you show people pictures of aborted babies. That's the purpose of it, is to shock people into recognizing we can't make this about politics, it's about life. We'll be right back. Focal Point American Family Radio.
Looking for a great vacation for you and your family spring break? Well, so are we. And I think we've got the place for you. Southeast Houston suffered unbelievable damage because of Hurricane Harvey. Hundreds of thousands of families have had their homes gutted because of the flooding they endured last year in September. Now you and I get a chance to be the hands and feet of Jesus. March 10th to March 24th, 8 Days of Hope is going to do its first ever back-to-back trip. 8 Days of Hope, 14 and 15. It's free. All you have to do is get to Houston. We provide the food and lodging. We're looking for skilled professionals, people who know how to work with their hands, and maybe they do this for a living. We're also looking for people that are less skilled, but are still looking to be a part of something way bigger than just themselves. You don't have to come for all 2 weeks. You can come for as little as 3 days. Go to 8daysofhope.com for more information, 8daysofhope.com. Come be a part of something huge. 8 Days of Hope, 14 and 15. Be the hands and feet of Jesus in Southeast Houston. 8daysofhope.com.
Have you ever disagreed with your child's teacher?
Welcome to Tips with public school educator Dr. Bill Ziegler.
Almost every parent will disagree at some point with their child's teacher. How do you express your disagreement without becoming disrespectful or rude? First, I think it's always best to share your disagreements with the teacher and not your child. Talk with the teacher without your child in earshot. Next, if there's emotion involved, try and wait a day or two to reflect on the situation and then decide if it's a good idea to express your thoughts with the teacher. Of course, be respectful and communicate your vision and goals that you have for your child in a calm and loving way. Don't engage in an email battle. Pick up the phone or visit the school and talk in person. For more ideas on how to positively express your disagreement with your child's teacher, visit my website and click on the parent link today.
Visit our website at 4tips.org. That's the number 4tipps.org.
Here on American Family Radio, this is David Wolin with Haven Ministries, inviting you to anchor your day in God's Word. Some people say Christianity is narrow-minded, a crutch for those who are weak. But as an insightful pastor once said, people who say things like that aren't taking it far enough. Christianity isn't a crutch for the weak, it's more like CPR for the dead. You see, it's not until you come to faith in Christ that you can look back and realize that, as Paul once wrote, you were dead in your transgressions and sins, in which you used to live when you followed the ways of this world. But here's the glory of the gospel. God, who is rich in mercy, made us alive with Christ even when we were dead in our transgressions. Get daily reminders of God's great love for you with Anchor Devotional. Visit getanchor.com.
American Family Radio. You're listening to Focal Point with Brian Fisher. Video segments of today's program will be posted at afr.net and on the Focal Point Facebook page. You'll also find the best collection of Brian's resources on our Facebook page. If you're on Twitter, be among the very first every morning to find out what the day's show will be about. Just follow Brian at Brian J. Fisher.
Brian J. Fisher.
Hi, and welcome back to Focal Point American Family Radio. Brian Fisher is my name. It's great to have you in our conversation today. You know, and speaking of seeing the bodies of babies, that's why ultrasounds are so effective in the pro-life movement. You know, when a mom goes into a crisis pregnancy clinic and she sees an ultrasound, she sees a picture of the body of her baby. I mean, 65 to 80% of abortion-minded women, when they go into a clinic and they see the ultrasound, will change their mind about aborting their baby. You know, that's one of the great pro-life laws that people can pass. We worked on one in Idaho, got it through our legislature that required every woman to be given an opportunity to look at an ultrasound image of her baby because they're very, very powerful. And we did a display on Boise State campus. We really had to work to get the administration to sign off on it, but it was a display that had these large blow-up pictures of aborted babies on big, giant boards. We had it out in the main plaza outside the student center, and we compared it to two kinds of genocide, the lynchings of blacks in the South and what the Nazis did to the Jews. And we had pictures of what happened to blacks in the South, and pictures of what the Nazis did to the Jews in World War II. And then juxtaposed with that, side by side, were pictures of what the abortion industry is doing to babies. And we had a hard time getting approval to do it. But we finally were able to do it, and it did shock the conscience of a lot of people on that campus. Now let's play clip number 9. I love this story. I mean, it's a tragic situation, but it shows you some of the possibilities even that exist with students if they're properly trained. Here's a student, I think there's another one who may chime in at one point, who were in the ROTC program, the junior ROTC program at this school. It's a Reserve Officer Training Corps, so it's a kind of first stage in pursuing a military career. And these guys were ROTC students on the campus, and one of them talks about what happened when the shooting first began.
I heard the first 2 or 3 pops, and I knew it was gunshots. I looked back at all the kids behind me. There's 60 kids looking at me. What do I do? Where do I go? I just yell, "Get back in the classroom." Everyone starts sprinting back. They're trampling over each other. I start running. I see a kid in front of me almost fall, and I'm like, wait, slow down, take it slowly. I start trying to just herd kids in there, get them to where they're not pushing and trampling each other, and just get them into the room safely. I pulled in teachers. I pulled in kids that weren't in my class. There was kids walking around that had no clue where to go, and I was like, if you don't know where your class is, get in mine. I just pulled them in. We shoved them in the back of the classroom, and me and Colton took these Kevlar mats that we have from our marksmanship.
Kevlar, so hold on, slow down for 1 second here. So you've got all these guys, teachers, students, huddled into this classroom together. You just mentioned Kevlar, so like a material for a bulletproof vest.
Yes, sir, like the body armor.
Like body armor. Yes. So that just happened to be because you guys are part of JROTC.
Yes, sir.
You knew that was going to be in the classroom, or you found it once you got in there?
Yeah, we knew it was in there. We're in there daily, and he goes, hey, we should put those mats in front of everyone. They're Kevlar. They're big hanging.
So at that point, you guys had met up, and you guys were together in the same classroom. You guys had this Kevlar material. What did you do with that?
They're big hanging curtains of Kevlar, and he said to me, he was like, those are Kevlar, we should put them in front of us. And I was like, you're a genius, that's a great idea. I went and confirmed it with my first sergeant, and me and him started moving them. We made a wall in front of all the kids out of the Kevlar pads. Wow.
Wow. So they made a curtain with these Kevlar pads, and it protected who knows how many students, or would have. I don't think the shooter went into that room, but they were thinking, and you could clearly sense the leadership potential in this kid, taking charge, getting people to safety, and providing some kind of on-the-spot solution. That guy's going to make a great military officer one day. Now, let's play clip number 7. This is Steven Pinker. He is a professor at Harvard University. He's one of these real smart people, thinks he's the smartest person in the room, probably thinks he's the smartest person in the country. Anyway, he was on Hugh Hewitt's show Sunday morning, and here's what he had to say about prayer and school shootings.
It's certainly against the belief that that God interferes with the laws of the universe, and that by praying to him we can make the world better. I think that is a dangerous belief, because it's not true. If we want to make the world better, we've got to figure out how to do it ourselves. If we want to cure disease, we've got to come up with antibiotics and vaccines, not prayer. If we want to stave off global warming, we can't just assume that God won't let terrible things happen. All of which really cast doubt on the idea that there's a benevolent shepherd who looks out for human welfare. I mean, what was the benevolent shepherd doing in Florida while that teenager was massacring his classmates? If we want to make humans better off, we can't assume that there is a God that flouts the laws of physics and biology. That's a very sincere belief. It's not dissing religious believers, because, as I said, religious institutions can do a great deal of good. But if you're counting on God to make the world a better place, then you're probably going to make the world a worse place, because he's not listening.
Okay, so
and we saw that yesterday.
You know what the problem is? It's exactly the reverse of what this guy is saying. He says the problem in Florida is that God was not listening. No, the problem was that the school was not asking. The school was not seeking him. The school was not talking to God. The school was not seeking his presence. The school was not seeking his assistance. The school was not seeking, not asking for his protection. Do you remember Revelation 3:20? That's Jesus, a very familiar verse, but it's relevant to what we're talking about here. What does Jesus say in Revelation 3:20? Behold, I do what? I stand at the door and knock. He who hears my voice and opens to me, I will come in with him and fellowship with him, and he with me. So notice the picture that Jesus paints there. He's out in the hallway. He would like to come in. He'd like to be a part of your world. He would like to have a relationship with you where you could converse with each other. You could communicate with each other. You could enjoy each other. You could enjoy a relationship with each other. But you have to invite him in first. The door is what? The door is closed. So the door between Christ and you is closed. That's the picture. And Jesus is knocking at it. Now notice what Jesus is not doing. He's not taking a battering ram and knocking down the door. That's not the way he rolls. He wants to go where he's invited, where he's welcomed, and where he's wanted. So he knocks at the door in the hope that you will, of your own volition, go to the door, open the door, and invite him in, and then he will come in. Now, what happens when he comes into the room where you are? What happens when evil or danger comes into that room where you are? Christ is right there with you. And he's there to be your defender and be your protector. He can't do it from out in the hallway. You know, you think about, and what we've done with Christ is we have disinvited him from our school campuses for 60 years. We've told him, go away. We don't want you at baccalaureate services. We don't want you at graduation services. We don't want you at school assemblies. We don't want you at the beginning of the day. We don't want you here. Now, what do you do? What do you do if you have any kind of decency in you, any kind of character? What do you do when people tell you to go away? They tell you that we don't want you here. What do? You honor their request. You go away. You withdraw your presence. And so if they get into some kind of trouble and you could help them and you're not there, that's not your fault. That's their fault because they kicked you out. And ladies and gentlemen, that's what we have been doing for 60 years. Now, I want to remind you again that when God goes away, once he's been invited in, and then he is rejected, he's told to leave, he's very reluctant. He leaves very slowly because he wants to stay. He wants to be a part of our lives, wants to be a part of our world. He wants to continue to be a protector for us. I'm going back to Ezekiel chapter 8 here, and Ezekiel saw into the temple in the 6th month, and he saw abominations there in the temple. This is the temple that was dedicated to God. This was the temple where his presence was located in the Ark of the Covenant, in the most holy place. And he got a picture into the inner court. The Spirit lifted me up between earth and heaven and brought me in visions of God to Jerusalem into the inner court. Behold, the glory of the God of Israel was there. Where? In the inner court. He also saw the image of jealousy. And his guide said to him, Son of man, do you see what they are doing, the great abominations that the house of Israel are committing here to drive me far from my sanctuary? Next step, he brought me to the entrance of the court. There was a hole in the wall. Son of man, dig in the wall. There was an entrance. Go in and see the vile abominations they are committing here. Every form of creeping things and loathsome beasts were engraved on the walls, all the idols of the house of Israel. Then he brought me to the north gate of the house of the Lord. Behold, there women sat weeping for a false god. O son of man, do you see? You will see still greater abominations than these. Brought him to the inner court of the temple. Is it too light a thing for the house of Judah to commit the abominations that they commit here, that they should fill the land with violence, provoke me still further to anger? And so what he saw then, verse 3 of chapter 9, the glory of God of Israel had gone up from the cherub in the most holy place on which it rested to the threshold of the house. And then it went from the threshold of the house to the threshold of the city, it went to the entrance of the east gate of the house, then the east gate of the city, and eventually departed, never to be seen again. So God will leave, but his departure is reluctant. So, ladies and gentlemen, if we want God's help in protecting our schools, we got to use the tools he's made available to us, himself through prayer and guns through training. Focal Point, American Family Radio. Be right back.
If God has already planned every detail of your life, do you really have control over your choices? Is it possible for Christians to make the wrong decision? This week on Pathway to Victory, Dr. Robert Jeffress answers these pressing questions regarding God's will. Don't miss the conclusion of our series called How to Make Wise Decisions, this Monday through Friday on Pathway to Victory.
Join us for Pathway to Victory with Pastor Robert Jeffress, weekday mornings at 6 Central on American Family Radio.
Announcing 3 new episodes of Ryan DeFrady's Secret Agent. These animated half-hour episodes will entertain children.
That's right!
And teach lessons about joy, patience, and the dangers of selfishness. Ryan DeFrady's is a secret agent with a whole lot to learn, and he insists on working alone until he's paired with a very unlikely partner.
Mommy!
Ryan DeFrady's Secret Agent, episodes 4, 5, and 6 from American Family Studios are available now at afastore.net.
Sheila from Tennessee attended one of the town hall meetings hosted by Dan Celia. She left thinking about different ways to handle her finances.
Dan Celia spoke a lot about tithing and being faithful to the Lord, and I definitely intend on getting in on this charitable gift annuity, which I've never done, but it sounds so exciting. Listening to him in there, it made me reevaluate my way of spending money, my way of doing, and it shows you that a little bit can go a long way when you place it in the Master's hands. So what we need to do, and what I intend on doing, is taking a little bit and making it be worth much for the Lord.
Find out if a charitable gift annuity from the AFA Foundation is right for you at 800-326-4543, extension 345. That's 800-326-4543, extension 345, or email foundation@afa.net.
American Family Radio. You're listening to Focal Point with Brian Fisher. Focal Point, Brian Fisher.
Hi, and welcome back to the last segment of today's program of Focal Point on American Family Radio. Give us a call. Number to call is 888-589-8840, 888-589-8840. While you're calling in, let me play a couple of sound bites for you. This is Chris Wallace, clip number 4, and there's a reason why I'm playing this clip for you. Let's listen.
So, people can jump to conclusions all they want, but there is no evidence at this point that has been presented that there was any collusion between the Trump campaign, Trump associates, and this Russian effort to disrupt the election. It does not point to collusion between the Russians and the Trump campaign, but it does indicate that what this really was about, for all the talk and the effort to get us to look at other things, what this is really about is Russian interference in a U.S. presidential election, and we need to remember that.
Now, the reason I played that is Chris Wallace, I think, probably has the most sterling reputation of any reporter in Washington, D.C. He has an impeccable reputation for honesty, for fairness as a journalist. It's very difficult to identify what Chris Wallace's political leanings are because he shields them, because his job, he knows, is to be a journalist. He will ask the direct questions. He will ask even the hard questions, but he asks them of everybody. So he's fair in the way he goes about. And so everybody trusts him. He's a sober guy. He's not given to conspiracy theories. He's not given to wild, outlandish interpretations of things. And he says, look, this Mueller indictment indicates that there is simply no evidence that there was any collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. None. Zip. This indictment does not point to collusion between the Russians and the Trump campaign. So when you've got a guy of Chris Wallace's character and reputation saying, look, there's no evidence of collusion here, you can take that to the bank. Now, clip number 5, here's Adam Schiff, and listen to who he says is partly to blame for this.
I do think, though, that in fairness, some of the responsibility is also attributed to the Obama administration for not establishing a more forceful deterrent. I think it goes back to the Korean hack of Sony, in which there was a minimal response. I think that others around the world watched that and determined that cyber is a cost-free intervention. With the Russians, we should have called them out much earlier. Senator Feinstein and I were the first two to make an official attribution, but it's not the same coming from two members of Congress from the same party as it is from an administration. And while I respect the motive in terms of the Obama administration, they didn't want to be seen as meddling. The American people had a right to know what was going on.
All right, so Adam Schiff says, look, the Obama administration's weakness in the way they responded to the hack of Sony just encouraged others to meddle in American affairs. Therefore, Obama administration shares some of the responsibility. One last clip, and then we'll go to the phones. This is Bob Casey, and listen to what Bob Casey wants, or more particularly, does not want to happen.
I don't think we'll know anywhere near the full story until he issues his report. Now, I don't know if that report will be this spring or this summer, but once you get into the summer and you get close to the election, I think it's a mistake for him to release it late. I agree. I think he should wait till after.
So I think with Bob Casey, why would you want to say wait till after the election? Because Bob Casey thinks that when this report is released, it is not going to be good for the Democrats. So if this thing is going to come out, he wants it to come out in time so that they will have the opportunity to neutralize the worst parts of the report, because I believe Bob Casey's convinced that it's going to be bad for the Democrats and it's going to be good Republicans. Now, maybe Adam Schiff is starting to pick up on a little bit of that. That's why he's shifting a little bit of the blame off to the Obama administration. The Senate Intelligence Committee conducted hearings, 11 hearings. They reviewed 100,000 pages of documents. They spent more than a year on the investigation. They've conducted more than 100 interviews, 250 hours, 4,000 pages of transcripts, and 11 hearings. And they have got bupkis. By their own admission, they have got nothing, zero, zip, nada, that would indicate collusion between Russia and Trump. All right, let's go to the phones. And tomorrow I'm going to start tomorrow, get you updated on this whole FBI thing. I've been remiss not to do that today, but time is limited. Let's go to Emmanuel in Orlando, Florida. Emmanuel, welcome. What's on your mind? Talk to me.
How you doing, Brian? 2 quick points, and I'd like to listen to your opinion. Once again, we see violence and terrible things happening in places that embrace evil. For example, natural disasters in California and this now in Miami. I mean, for example, I went down to Miami. I live in Orlando. And one of the things I saw was in broad daylight, half-naked women dancing in front of a restaurant trying to attract customers. And then the other thing is that one of the oldest laws in this country is being able to do a citizen's arrest. And what I mean by that is that this country is designed for us to police ourselves. And the more we infringe on our rights, the less ability we're going to have to police ourselves, and we'll become victims of tyranny.
All right. That's a good observation, Emmanuel. I appreciate that. And, going back to your first observation, that's confirmed by your observation confirmed by what we read in Ezekiel. Remember what Ezekiel's tour guide kept pointing to was the abominations that the nation of Israel was performing that were driving him from the temple, driving him from their presence. Their abominations were the things that were driving him off. And so we have to understand that this is a part of how God works. The scriptures are there so that we can learn from them and understand that if we continue to display publicly these abominations, to indulge in behavior that he finds abominable, that one of the things it's going to do is it's going to repel his presence. It's going to push him away from us. Let's go to Jay in Houston, Texas. Jay, welcome. What's on your mind? Talk to me.
Hi, Brian.
Hey.
I just want to comment on the Florida shooting and a video I saw that a kid took in the classroom and that day. And when the cops entered the classroom, they filed in there and they told the kids to put their hands up in the air instead of get flat on the floor. And then right after they entered the room, you start hearing shots fired. And they don't react. They don't, like, who's doing the shooting and look out the door, look around up and down the hall. No, they don't, that's not who's doing the shooting. They know who's doing the shooting. That's why they didn't react. I don't know if you saw the video, but I found that very, very odd.
Well, what I don't know what conclusion you might draw from that. What would you draw from that?
That they know who it is. They know who the shooters were because they didn't react to the shooting when the shots started being fired. It sounded like it was right there around the room, close by. They didn't react to it. They didn't go look out the door and look up and down the hallway like who's doing the shooting. Because I'm thinking they know who's doing the shooting. That's why they didn't react to it.
Well, you'd think once shooting started, almost everybody would react regardless of who was doing the shooting. So you're saying that how calm they were, that was a pretty odd thing to see them so calm when the shooting started.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like a giveaway.
All right.
Instead of, reacting like, whoa, and you go look out, the door and look up and down the hall like who's doing the shooting, they're just standing there, not reacting.
Now, do you think are you thinking that there might be another shooter besides this Nicholas Cruz guy, and that's who was off screen?
One of the school kids, little girl, she was interviewed, and she said there were 3 shooters.
Okay. All right, Jay. Well, we'll continue to watch that and see if evidence to confirm that comes out.
I may be wrong, but and correct me if I am. But the SWAT teams did not get in the building until after the shooting was over.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they didn't apprehend the shooter till he was a mile away from campus.
Yeah.
He'd been to a Subway and to a McDonald's before they caught up with him. And he was on foot, walking on foot. All right, let's go to Kay in Kansas. Kay, welcome. What's on your mind? Talk to me.
I just want to say, sir, is that man that was talking so badly about God, that we didn't need him, such and such, you remember what you just said, and I think that was pure Satan speaking through him, and that's all I want to say. That man is going to have and need God in his life someday, and that's all I want to say.
All right, thank you, Kay. And, they're particularly effective because what he was advocating for was clearly a completely satanic viewpoint, that God doesn't answer prayer, not involved, doesn't intervene, doesn't interview, you can't interfere, you can't expect him to help you, that kind of stuff. Just that's straight from the pit of hell. He's a very urbane, sophisticated guy, highly educated, very polished. And that makes him a very effective and dangerous spokesman for the devil, which is what he is. All right, Mildred in Florida. Mildred, welcome. What's on your mind? Talk to me.
Oh, good afternoon. I enjoy your program so much.
Thank you so much.
I heard a remark that I thought was very interesting. A woman asked God why he allowed those children to be killed at the school, and God answered, because I am not allowed in your school.
Well, I think that's a perfect way to put it. And people don't realize that God plays by the rules. God is not going to violate his own rules. He's established certain rules for how life goes, how things happen in spiritual warfare, and he won't violate them. And if Satan plays by those rules, he will be able to gain advantage in spiritual warfare. Satan has got to have permission to do what he does. If he does get permission, God says, you have the freedom to go into a certain environment. So he gets invited in by repeated sin, by occult behavior, by undealt with bitterness. Then we've opened up a little spot in life for Satan to come in, and he will do that. And God says, I'm not going to stop him because I've set up these rules. I play by the rules. I honor them. I am a just God. All right, let's go to Carrie in Ashland, Virginia. Carrie, last call of the day. Got about 20 seconds. Hit me with your best shot.
All right, thanks, buddy. I just remember there was a couple of years ago, I don't know if it was the elementary shooting that went on in Connecticut, or if it was the road, but there was somebody that was caught cleaning in the government. I don't know if it was senator.
Carrie, I'm going to have to let you go. I'm sorry. We just have a really, really bad connection. Anyway, that's it for today. Be back here tomorrow.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast do not necessarily reflect those of the American Family Association or American Family Radio.
Faith, family, freedom. American Family Radio. You can be among the first to receive updates about changes and special events coming up in our programming, and always keep up with the things you might have missed with American Family Radio's weekly newsletter.
Every Friday, you'll receive an email with a recap of the week's highlights from your favorite broadcasts, as well as important information about special programs in the near future. Add yourself to our mailing list at afr.net.
Faith, family, freedom. American Family Radio, a ministry of the American Family.